Race swaps when adapting characters into shows and movies recently has become a contentious issue. While it used to be something Hollywood would do from time to time, in the last few years it's been so incredibly common that it's almost shocking when it doesn't happen. And the MCU is one of the biggest offenders when it comes to this. Now, whenever you try to talk about this topic, it usually devolves down into one of two paths. Either some pretentious virtue-signaling douchebag who doesn't care about the source material steps in and just starts yelling at you that it doesn't matter what a character looks like, as long as they're a good character, right? With the heavy implication that if you continue to complain, you're basically a member of the Klan. Or some obnoxious clickbaity douchebag who also doesn't care about the source material steps in and just starts yelling at everyone about how woke and forced all of this diversity is, despite not knowing what the franchise they're now complaining about even was 2 seconds before they learned there was a race swap in it that they could yell about. However, for the majority of us, this is not a political issue. These are characters we deeply care about and have watched be changed into something completely unrecognizable. And though I talk a lot on this channel about the differences adaptations of characters have to their source material, I don't usually focus on race changes too much. Both because it muddies up the whole issue of what I'm talking about, and because it's pretty much just self-evident if you're looking at the screen. But I always see people making comments about the often large number of race changes on those adaptational accuracy lists, especially in the MCU, as well as people who just want to know more about my thoughts on the subject. So, for those of you who are interested in talking about this, as well as to straight up piss off those of you who call me racist anytime I even touch upon the topic of race in pop culture, let's dive in and take a look at the 5 worst of the worst MCU race swaps. So let's not waste any more time and get right into it by starting off with a character I'm very eager to tear apart when it comes to this kind of thing. Namor. Namor in comics is a pretty racially neutral character. He's got some vague Roman aesthetics, specifically his catchphrase, Imperius Rex, and the fact that his name is literally just Roman backwards. He's an old character who's become an integral part of Marvel lore, connected to Captain America, the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, and many, many other characters. He's a fan favorite due to his complex, ever-shifting morality, his incredibly unique design, and the fact that he's one of the company's oldest characters, having been published in various titles for like 80 years. In the comics, Namor is the son of a human named Leonard Mackenzie and an Atlantean named Fenn, born in the 1910s to 1920s and named Namor Mackenzie. Mackenzie after his father's last name, and Namor is an Atlantean word meaning avenging son. He's incredibly passionate about both his Atlantean people and their sovereignty over Atlantis and the oceans of the world. A passion that causes him to live up to his namesake when he strikes out at the surface world for endangering the oceans with nuclear tests, oil leaks, or anything that threatens his people. In the movies, they stripped away literally everything that makes him Namor, besides his little ankle wings, and made him a one-note character with every single motivation derived from his race. Because in the movies, there is no character named Namor. There is only Cha'at-to-Alamen. His parents were not an Atlantean and a human. They were both humans. He was born in 1571 in ancient Mexico to a Mayan tribe who had been infected by smallpox by Western colonizers and had eaten a fabled blue plant to survive that affected their biology and allowed them to start breathing underwater. While the other Mayans who'd eaten the plant turned blue, Cha'at-to-Almahen kept a human skin tone and gained small wings on his ankles for unspecified reasons, leading to his people worshipping him as their feathered serpent god K'uk-Alkan. When his mother died, she wanted to be buried in her ancestral homeland on the surface. When Cha'at-to-Almahen returned to ancient Mexico, he saw that the Mayan people had been suffering under Western Spaniard colonizers as slaves. Seeing his people suffer like this enraged Cha'at-to-Almahen / K'uk-Alkan, and so he slaughtered the settlers. A dying settler called him El Niño Sin Amor, meaning the child without love, with his last breath for some reason, and for some other reason, despite already having 2 names, Cha'at-to-Almahen took Sin Amor and turned it into Namor and started going by that. When they casted a Mexican actor in the role of Namor, a lot of people were upset, but I took a look at him, specifically his arched eyebrows, and thought, I can see that working. I was just excited to see Namor in the MCU. I had been for a long time, but I absolutely did not expect that casting a Mexican dude meant that they were going to rewrite every single aspect of the character into him being Mexican. I just thought we were going to get Namor. They removed him from the 1930s so that they could justify him being a member of an ancient Mayan tribe oppressed by Westerners. His enemy isn't surface dwellers, it's specifically Western colonizers, as he talks about with Shuri in the movie. He's basically a surface dweller who just dove underwater. He is not named Namor. There's definitely no Mackenzie. He's not half Atlantean. In fact, Atlanteans and Atlantis isn't even a thing. They all live in Talokan, which is a name derived from Talarak, which I definitely butchered, an underwater realm in Aztec mythology. His name is derived from Spanish words you'd learn in high school intro to Spanish class like amor, meaning he's not Namor, he's Normor. And yeah, they did do the green shorts, which I applaud them for, but they ruined it by tossing a bunch of random-ass superficial Mayan crap on him with no restraint. Same goes for all of the Tokolonil. This is the epitome of everything fans hate about race swaps. They could have just casted a dude with slightly darker skin than in the comics, and I think the majority of fans wouldn't have cared that much. Been annoyed, sure, but getting to see a live-action Namor would have overshadowed any annoyance or minor differences for most fans. But we did not get a live-action version of the interesting and morally complex Namor and his decades of legit history. We got an original character named Namor, who outside of his ethnicity is a pretty vapid, hollow character, which is what happens when every element of a character is derived from something as boring as their ethnicity. Ugh. Next up, let's move on to one of the most infamous and hated race swaps in the entire MCU, the Ancient One. When it came time to adapt Doctor Strange from the comics into the MCU movie, they did a pretty good job. There are major differences, but the basic story of Stephen Strange, arrogant surgeon more concerned with money and his perfect record than about using his abilities to help people, loses the use of his surgeon's hands, and after spending his entire fortune trying to find a way to fix them, finds and trains under the Ancient One, learning the magic arts and humility, and rededicating his life to using his newfound abilities in the service of others. It's a solid adaptation of his origin story, and the writers put a lot of work into figuring out how to adapt it in a way modern MCU audiences specifically would enjoy. But when it came to adapting The Ancient One, the people making this movie got so weird. The Ancient One in comics is a pretty simple character. He's basically the archetype of the wise old master you've seen a million times. Specifically the Eastern variant, often seen in stories where a Western person seeking ancient hidden knowledge will find and learn mystical abilities from him. Which is exactly the kind of story Doctor Strange is. Though like pretty much every comic character, he's been fleshed out a lot over the decades and is an incredibly important part of Marvel lore due to serving as the Sorcerer Supreme for centuries before passing the title on to Doctor Strange. But for some reason, there's this bizarre idea in Hollywood that if a white dude learns something from an Asian dude, it's racist? So they wanted to kick the Asian character out of the movie and make him white, but I guess a white dude learning something from another white dude is also racist? I mean, you know what kinds of things they talk about when they get together. So they turned him into a girl, patted themselves on the back, and called it a day, because I guess in the bizarre racial algebra they use in Hollywood, one white female is equivalent to one Asian male? And listening to them bend over backwards to justify how they came to this decision is hilarious and reveals who the real racists here are. First off, one of the writers claimed that just portraying the comic version of the Ancient One in the movie would realize the major Asian Fu Manchu stereotype. No, because Dr. Fu Manchu was a supervillain criminal mastermind. The Ancient One is a heroic defender of the Earth. Yeah, Fu Manchu is such an influential and famous character that he has become the archetype of a callous, brilliant Eastern criminal mastermind. But if you're weirdly worried about comparisons to this classical archetype, just design him differently. The Ancient One doesn't need a literal Fu Manchu mustache, man. The only similarity there has to be is his race. Next, the director had the idea to sidestep this, quote, problem by making the Ancient One female, but quickly thought that making the Ancient One an old woman would invoke the Dragon Lady stereotype. That one's even stupider than the first one. A Dragon Lady is an archetype that originates from a character in the classic comic Terry and the Pirates, with the Dragon Lady in that comic being a beautiful and seductive female pirate from Asia. The term is tossed onto many female Asian villains across pop culture, specifically ones with the combination of being powerful, intimidating, seductive, and mysterious. So what the hell are you talking about? Why would casting an old Asian woman make the Ancient One a dragon lady, dude? Again, she'd be a hero, not a villain. And if you're so worried, just don't toss her in a frickin' Chinese dress and give her resting bitch face. Problem solved. Then they thought, oh, I know how to solve this. What if we make her a young Asian woman instead? But no, apparently, according to the director, that would be Ugh. Exploiting an Asian fetish and would be a fanboy's dream girl. My God, you're telling me that you see having a non-elderly Asian woman in a movie as problematic because white audiences may find her attractive? And if they do find her attractive, it would be due to an Asian fetish. What in God's name are you? Oh my God. But lastly, they started coming up with the realization that even having the Ancient One be Asian in the first place would be problematic. Because according to the director, he wanted to avoid the stereotype of a Western character coming to Asia to learn about being Asian, and so decided to cast someone who wasn't Asian at all. Okay, I'm sorry, man, but what the hell are you talking about? You think that Stephen Strange learning magic is him learning to be Asian? You think Asian people all know magic? Yeah, there are stories where a Western dude goes to Asia and learns Kung Fu and Eastern spiritualism and stuff. But for one, that's not racist. There's plenty of stories where people do every random thing. But for two, that's not even the story of Doctor Strange. He learns magic from the Ancient One. What are you talking about? It doesn't have to be so complicated. One of the writers compared this problem to the Kobayashi Maru from Star Trek, aka that this was an unwinnable situation. But I'll tell you, man, if Captain Kirk was in charge of this, he would have easily found a way to win this. Because any moron could have found a way to win this. If you're worried about all these archetypes and stereotypical characters and crap, just don't do any of that stuff. Get the race thing out of your head, cast a well-known Asian actor who people respect, and then write the movie exactly the same as you did when you wrote the white female version of the Ancient One. Look, I get that there's a whole complex history when it comes to how characters from other cultures have been portrayed in Western media. And that when making something new, the people in charge want to be conscious about how archetypes created during older times are portrayed to modern fans of the wait. They say they also wanted to change his race to not have the film entangled in the Tibetan sovereignty debate. So this whole thing wasn't any of the crap they were claiming, they just cynically wanted to ensure this frickin' movie would release in China. What a bunch of two-faced Anyways, next up we have a character from a movie that there's honestly a good chance you did not watch. Kingo. Pretty much every member of the Eternals has a random race and gender tossed onto them. And while some of them bother fans of the characters' classic designs, I'm not that miffed about the actual racial changes of the characters. Superficially, I'm a lot more bothered by them changing Icarus's distinct golden hair to just being a normal brown color, and the overall lack of any influence from the Eternals creators, Jack friggin' Kirby, on the costumes and overall design aesthetic of the movie. And what a bad job they did portraying the group as godlike figures in the history of the world. These characters are supposed to be mythic figures of old come to life. So in the comics, they've all got perfect godlike features, and are visually inspired by our modern-day images of Greek gods, with many of them having been mistaken for them throughout the ages. And I think the movie was attempting to represent all the people of Earth's history through the races they chose for the team, so that they could walk among different civilizations without standing out. But they did such a bad job of portraying that instead the group just kind of looks like a one-of-every-color checklist. But the problem with each of the Eternals is much deeper than what skin color they happen to have. And if you really want some non-forced diversity from the franchise, there was already some in the comics. Specifically with a character like Kingo, who was introduced to show that the Eternals come in as many variations as humanity itself, with Kingo having more Eastern features, specifically Japanese. Kingo had spent centuries of his life living in and embracing the culture of Japan, from ancient times into the modern day. He trained under and then became one of the greatest swordsmen on the planet, learning the code and ways of the ancient samurai. Due to his immense love of samurai culture, he has kept that legacy alive in the modern day by becoming a famous movie star in Japan, specifically known for portraying swordsmen in samurai-related movies. So while many of the Eternals keep a distance between themselves and mankind, Kingo Sunin walks among them, learning their ways and living in their culture, making him one of the more grounded of the group. So, sounds awesome for a movie, right? An immortal samurai warrior, humble enough to become an actor in the modern day, with a connection to humanity most of the team lacks? Honestly, that sounds like a character that would provide some of the diversity and characterization that this movie really needed. But for God knows what reason, they decided to change his race from Japanese to Indian. And sure, Eternals don't technically have a race the way humans do. He could be whatever race they wanted and still have a deep connection to Japan and samurai culture. And in the movies, the Eternals all had incredibly diverse skin tones and features, but they didn't seem to stay strictly in the areas where people who looked like them traditionally made their homes. So there's really no rules here. They could do whatever they wanted. But of course they didn't. Like Namor, they completely changed the character to fit the new skin color, because they made Kingo Indian instead of Japanese. So of course they'd need to make him a Bollywood movie star. Why? Because he's Indian, and the comic version is an actor, so Indian plus actor equals Bollywood? Wow, and it's the fans who are racist, huh? While the Kingo in the comics has a connection to humanity through his adherence to the samurai life, Kingo in the movies is just vain and self-absorbed. I don't know the stereotype of Bollywood movie stars, but I'm gonna assume that that's where this attitude comes from. Basically, this change is as stupid as if they'd made him white and had him be just a Hollywood star. People would have been pissed about that. And you know, whatever race you choose, it doesn't matter. We were denied a frickin' samurai eternal here. Who the hell wants to be teased with a badass samurai and instead gets some random dude instead? And I can tell you the reason they made this change. They already had 2 Asian Eternals on the cast. You wouldn't want 3. That'd be crazy. They already had actors to racistly try to appeal to the Chinese and Korean markets. They didn't really care about the Japanese market. But the Indian movie market is huge. Toss one of them in there, put in some Bollywood crap, and boom! Money? The people making these things will always tell you these race swaps are all to reflect the real world outside your window, or some crap. But casting and changes like this show that's total baloney. It's always the same thing. They're just racist and think that different colored people will be more likely to watch movies with people of the same color in them. Regardless of how many times it's been proven, people just like well-written characters of all colors and creeds across various cultures. But none of that matters. We were denied a samurai immortal in the MCU, so screw this whole thing. Moving on now, we come to one that's personally pissed me off the most, and I cannot believe I have to put on this list, The Watcher. In Guardians of the Galaxy 2, we got our first glimpse of the Watchers in a quick cameo where we see them talking with Stan Lee. And though it was only for a little joke, it was still awesome for fans. The Watchers are one of the most unique and iconic parts of the greater Marvel universe in comics. And best of all, for the most part, their designs were lifted pretty much right out of those comics and given to us in live action. They have their white robes, their oversized bald heads, their distinct blue collars and capes, their impassive, emotionless expressions, and they all look the same. And for me, at least, it was freaking awesome to see, because due to the lack of the MCU having the rights to the Fantastic Four at the time, as well as the relatively realistic world building of the movies at that time, the Watchers are something I just never expected to get to see on screen in my entire life. And the introduction of the Watchers into continuity got me and many fans thinking, holy crap, wait, could we actually get Uatu in the MCU? In the comics, the Watchers are an ancient race of cosmic beings who have taken a vow to watch and catalog the most important events throughout the universe, but never to interfere. With Uatu being the Watcher of Earth and its surrounding area, who despite his vow is often moved by the heroic struggles of Earth's heroes to help out against unbeatable threats like Galactus, with a special relationship to the Fantastic Four. Whenever an important moment happens within the Marvel Universe, Uatu will be there watching, sometimes imperceptibly, sometimes fully visible to all. He and the Watchers are one of the most unique and iconic elements of the Marvel Universe, and when fans heard Uatu was going to be adapted into the MCU, appearing in What If, many were incredibly excited, especially since they'd looked nearly perfect in Guardians. So with all Watchers pretty much looking exactly the same, why would I expect him to look any different? And when I saw they'd casted Jeffrey Wright to voice him in the series, I thought, awesome. He is a really great actor, and he has an amazing voice. I think he could really knock it out of the park and give us something special. Never in a trillion years did I think that just because they had an actor who happened to be black, that it meant they'd race swap a character as distinct and iconic to Marvel lore as frickin' Uatu. Specifically because Watchers don't have race the way humans do. Though some artists will waver in this, for the most part, all Watchers look basically exactly the same. They dress the same, they act the same, they've got the same proportions, and yes, the same skin color. Basically exactly how they were portrayed in Guardians. Like Galactus, they're cosmic beings. They aren't racial like humans are. If you want to question why they look so human, that's fine, you can do a story about that. But if you decide you're just going to start thinking of them like boring old humans and give them an Earth race, what is the point of that? It only makes them feel more mundane and less cosmic. And out of universe, what benefit is there to changing Uatu's skin tone anyways? What is gained by changing a literal cartoon character's skin color from what it's always been portrayed and recognizable as? It'd be different if they'd actually casted Jeffrey Wright to play the Watcher in live action and not just voice him in a cartoon. I really wouldn't complain too much about that, even if it would annoy me a little bit. But if Uatu ever does appear in live action, I doubt they're gonna pull a frickin' MODOK and just awkwardly enlarge the actor's head. My guess is he'd be a fully CGI character. So if you're not at least getting an actor's face, what is there to gain by specifically changing the race of this incredibly popular Marvel character? But whatever, it's the choice they made. But here's the most important thing. The Watcher's color scheme has been perfected across decades to give him an incredibly specific presence and aura. You cannot just swap one color from his design and still think he'll have the same presence. Uatu is basically 3 colors: his skin, cape, and robes. If you change one, you have to adjust the others to make him look cool and important still, or he's just gonna look like crap, which is what happened. Take a look at Ultimate Alliance's version of Uatu for comparison. In that game, they wanted to go the opposite direction and lighten his skin to make him appear more alien. But they didn't just make him super pale. They completely redesigned and colored his cloak, cape, and entire outfit to match. They added more gold on his collar to break up the white cloak from his pale skin. They added some eyeshadow to break up his white eyes from that skin as well. They desaturated the blue of his cape so it wouldn't take over the design and our eyes would be focused on his face. There was a lot of thought put into this, and they did try to tweak the MCU design a bit, but it wasn't to match the skin change. It was just as random as that choice was. They removed pretty much all of the white robes, which makes him even less distinct as the character he's supposedly based on. They enlarged the metal on his chest while also darkening it, making it look in some scenes like he's got his robes open to let his nips breathe due to how much it looks like his skin color. And weirdly, they cover up one arm while exposing the other in all that blue, making it look like he's a naked pervert in a bathrobe doing God knows what while he watches with that other hand, giving a whole new layer to his obsession with Agent Carter. Ugh. So while other race swaps will annoy people because of how the writers will also massively change the characterizations, for Uatu, it's much simpler. He used to look distinct, cool, godlike, iconic, recognizable, and important. Now he looks boring, unmemorable, mundane, and just ugly as hell. And they've got me hoping they never bring this garbage character into the movie. Specifically because What If completely ruins his purpose in the universe and makes him say some of the stupidest, most out-of-character and mundane crap imaginable. Which I guess makes sense, since it matches his new design. When we see his head from afar, silhouetted by cosmic lights in the distance, he looks frickin' awesome. And then when we just cut to him without all those cool effects, he just looks like some frickin' guy. Of all the frickin' characters they race swapped in this universe, I cannot believe the frickin' Watcher is one of them. Gugh. Anyways, let's move on from that to our last worst MCU race swap for the day, the Mandarin. This one is pretty funny, because it is simultaneously one of the best race swaps and the worst race swaps of all time, all in one movie. The Mandarin in comics is awesome, and one of the greatest and most dangerous villains in all of Marvel. The man who would become the Mandarin has a few conflicting origins, but what matters is he fled a difficult life that created a deep resentment for the world within him. And in his travels, he eventually came across an ancient crashed alien spaceship. Within it, he found technology so advanced it seemed to be magic. And due to his immense intellect and ambition, he spent years learning to master that technology. Specifically, what to a human appears to be 10 rings he wears on his fingers, each ring granting him incredibly unimaginable power. He then used this power to begin conquering nearby areas, enslaving local villages, and beginning his long-term ambition to conquer the entire world he hated so much, eventually coming into conflict with Iron Man as he continued to expand his power outwards, clashing with the hero time and again as his greatest foe. In the comics, the Mandarin was revealed to be indirectly responsible for Tony Stark's rebirth as Iron Man, as he was funding Wong Chu, the warlord who had kidnapped Tony Stark when he traveled overseas to demonstrate his tech to the military, with Wong Chu forcing Stark to make weapons for him and Stark responding by creating his first Iron Man armor and dedicating his life to using his tech to protect others instead of selling weapons. The original comics were written during the 60s, and so to retell Tony's origin in the modern day, they relocated Tony's abduction from Vietnam by communists led by Wong Chu to the Middle East by a terrorist organization led by Raza Hamidmi al-Wazar. In planning ahead, they decided to call this organization the Ten Rings, planting the seeds early to eventually lead to Iron Man's greatest villain. And 2 movies later, we finally revealed the true leader of the Ten Rings. And due to a mixture of the same weird worries about the Fu Manchu stereotype as would later afflict the Ancient One, as well as wanting to continue building this contemporary world, they race-swapped the Mandarin from Chinese to being seemingly Middle Eastern. And unlike so many of the other examples of when they tried to do this, people surprisingly accepted it. Fans were super excited for the Mandarin. He's Tony's greatest enemy, incredibly powerful, and people who read the comics were super excited to finally see Iron Man face off against the seeming magic of the Ten Rings. And for people who had not read the comics, in all the trailers and promotional stuff, he came off as super intimidating and dangerous. Despite his name, the Mandarin isn't really a specifically racial character. Comic purists would prefer if he looked like he does in the comics, of course, but for most fans, the elaborate green costume, the villainous Eastern aesthetic, the long beard, the overbearing and intimidating presence, the incredible aura of danger around him, and the promise of a showdown between Tony's tech and Mandarin's seeming magic was enough to excite the hell out of them. The people making the movie found a way to beat the Kobayashi Maru and appease the weird racial worries of Hollywood with comic fan expectations. This really proves that any idea can work if you write it well enough, with the writers commenting, "We're not saying he's Chinese, we're saying he, in fact, draws a cloak around him of Chinese symbols and dragons, because it represents his obsession with Sun Tzu in various ancient arts of warfare he studied." And honestly, that's a pretty cool description for the Mandarin. He doesn't dress like that in comics because he's a Chinese dude. Regular Chinese dudes don't dress up in theatrical, historically inspired costumes and try to take over the world, as far as I'm aware. He dresses like that because he thinks it's cool. Just like every villain dresses in whatever specific bizarre gimmick they dress in. They found their way to divorce a specifically Chinese character from his race, and it's honestly impressive. So, of course, they screwed it all up. Because not only were they uncomfortable with having an Asian dude as the villain, but they were also uncomfortable with having a Middle Eastern dude as the villain. So they revealed that the Mandarin was actually just a British actor in disguise as a terrorist. And the real Mandarin was a white American who wears regular suits, can breathe fire, and has a dragon tattoo on his chest. This is where all this overly concerned thinking about how race will be perceived gets us. Instead of having an awesome Asian villain, instead of having an awesome Middle Eastern villain, we just got another white dude as the villain, with absolutely none of the aspects that made the character popular in the first place. And it led to probably the second most hated villain adaptation in the entire MCU, with the whole plot being so overly convoluted that they needed Aldrich Killian to spell it out to the audience by saying, "I am the Mandarin," at the end of the movie. With this all being so poorly received that they decided to retcon the whole thing and bring in the, quote, real Mandarin years later, which is a whole other mess I've previously covered in another video. And I think based on what we've seen, we can all tell that all this BS about Fu Manchu stereotypes is just a bunch of malarkey again. We know the real reason they didn't want the Mandarin to be Chinese was because they were worried China wouldn't like a Chinese villain in a movie they'd want to release there. So they came up with this, "Oh, we're not selling out to China, we're actually very racially sensitive to stereotypes" bull crap, as a cover to the fact that they've sold these characters souls. And so instead of getting an awesome villain, we got one that most people have completely forgotten about. So looking through all of this, we can see that people get so worried about race in these movies that it just ruins everything. Cool characters get rewritten into frickin' lectures on Western colonialism, ruining what fans had been excited to see, and likely making more people just a little more racist in response. Cool characters will get randomly turned white in some kind of bizarre attempt to not be racist that comes off as twice as racist instead. Cool characters will get replaced with completely different characters of completely different races and lose everything distinct about them to replace with whatever stereotype comes along with that new race. Characters who really aren't that racial at all will get dragged into this insanely boring, tedious conversation Hollywood seems intent on having with people who go their whole lives without thinking about race and just want to go watch something fun for a few frickin' hours after work. And some of the greatest characters in all of comics will get completely butchered, with fans being implied to be racist for having liked these characters all these years, while the real reasons the people up top made these changes was in hopes of making money, and hoping that if you call enough people racist, they'll be too scared to keep yelling at you about it. But don't listen to those people. They're frickin' idiots and losers. If you're annoyed by any change in a character you love, go yell about it. As a fan, it's your job to complain when things you love suck. If you don't, the people up top will only hear the voices of a bunch of sycophants and trolls. The real fans are the ones that matter. It ain't racist to want a character to look like they've always looked. That's absolute insanity. I was so excited to see Namor, Uatu, and the Mandarin on screen. But because of this weird nonsense, I've been denied all of them. And this is only a drop in the hat of all the times Hollywood's pulled this kind of crap. And even when it comes to the MCU, based on what we're seeing out of Wonder Man, it looks like it ain't gonna be the end of this kind of stuff. With it seeming like the MCU is gonna try to make a commentary on their own propensity for race swaps, with Simon Williams in the show being changed to black while playing an in-universe classically white version of Wonder Man. And boy howdy, am I looking forward to seeing how they're gonna go about that. Anyways, with only 5, it's inevitable I didn't touch upon a character you wanted to see on here. Let me know who it is below. Maybe I'll do a future video on more. Same goes for any characters outside the MCU you want to see in this format. Did I forget any major details? I'd love to hear that kind of stuff. Disagree with me? Give it your best shot, man. I'm pretty confident about what I'm saying. If you ain't subscribed and like this video and all that, do it now, man. Let's keep increasing the voice of this thing we're all building together here until Hollywood is forced to bend its knee to our will. Until next time, fun talking to stick out.